The Competition Commission has received 1,600 complaints relating to excessive pricing, and it's now released its report on food price monitoring. The Commission found that the weakening of the rand and panic buying at the start of the lockdown were the drivers behind food price inflation. But the report also notes that the forces that initially drove up those prices, including the forces in terms of the closing of restaurants, have since subsided and prices have now also stabilised. Let's unpack the story a bit more. We're joined by Chief Economist at the Competition Commission, James Hodge. James, thanks very much for your time this morning. I mean, it's a great story to look at as we take stock of the various forces at play when it comes to the cost, particularly of food, and how that impacts our poorer communities. And it's so interesting that this report talks about panic buying as partial drivers of price increases of food. So the rich are able to buy the food, and then the poor are the worst affected by those rising prices.
Absolutely, and that's why we're concerned, and we've been monitoring food prices since the very beginning. And this is why we have regulations to try and ensure that everyone has access to products and at fair prices as well. Because often in these situations, you're absolutely right, it's the poor that suffer.
So James, just take us through the kinds of 1,600 complaints you received as the Competition Commission relating to excessive prices. Just take us through a few of those complaints and what they related to.
So a number of them, well over 300 or so, are on food items in particular, and probably an equal number of that has been around face masks and hand sanitizers, precisely the products that are essential in this time and which people sought to buy going into lockdown to protect themselves, but also to ensure a healthy immune system. So the kind of complaints are really directly from consumers saying that the shop that they normally go to, suddenly the price of potatoes or onions or fresh meat has gone up, and gone up noticeably, so that they make a complaint. So we follow up with that, determine whether costs have gone up or whether this is just exploitative behavior from a retailer. And that's why, although there have been some natural forces, economic forces that have pushed up some costs in markets, what has exacerbated the situation is the behavior of certain market participants. So some retailers have exploited the situation, and we've prosecuted for price gouging. But we've also seen in upstream and other markets that some of these small fresh produce markets are subject to manipulation, or that retailers are notified of a looming cost increase and react immediately to put up prices when their costs haven't actually gone up.
So, James, you also talk about, the forces that were initially at play that led to these prices increasing. Those forces are now under control. Prices should normalize. But what are some of the protections for consumers that are available to keep this in check?
Well, consumers need to be active, and they need to be aware of what's happening, because often consumers are restricted in their movement. So they are dependent on the stores that are close by, but they need to react, and they need to send in complaints to the Competition Commission or the National Consumer Council. So consumers do play an important role, but we also are proactive on enforcement. We are engaged with retailers, food suppliers, to ensure that now that costs are coming down, that prices also come down in shops and consumers benefit. So we still play that important role to ensure consumer welfare in this time.
I mean, then there's this issue around, and this was an issue that existed long before the lockdown, this disparity between food market prices and retail prices. There are some serious questions still there. Are there still sort of investigations that the Competition Commission will continue with to look deeper into that?
Yes, I think that is a long-standing problem, you're right, and it's something that now has been almost highlighted in a crisis and exacerbated. So we need to pursue that, and it is something that we will continue to investigate and look at. It's also why we're concerned that now that prices are dropping in markets upstream, that retailers pass that on. We all know that prices are quick to go up and slow to come down. So we are concerned about that. We are going to continue to engage with the retailers and food suppliers to ensure this happens and consumers benefit. But these are failures in the market that need to be addressed and will be the subject of investigation and prosecution if necessary.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about, those who are the worst affected by a phenomenon like this, the poorest South Africans who have less money to spend on food. They're at the top of our list of the people worst affected here. But farmers as well are affected by this disparity between retail prices. And they actually, according to the report from the Competition Commission, they actually carry most of the risk when it comes to food pricing and not much of the profit.
Exactly. So the price they get in markets, if it's traded on an exchange like the South African Futures Exchange or in fresh produce markets, fluctuates up and down, and the farmers get whatever price is available on the day. But after that, everyone just adds a markup, and they take no risk, because whatever they bought it at, they add a markup, and sometimes when prices go up a lot, markups don't change when they actually should be coming down, because the absolute profit they're making is going up. So it is something we need to address. I think farmers will always face some risk, but I think we need to bring down markups through the chain. I think that is something the crisis has also highlighted for us, is that some of the markups for fresh produce in retailers is quite alarming, to be frank, even before the crisis. And we need to see what is happening and why that needs to change. So, we finished a grocery inquiry. We highlighted that exclusivity is part of the problem. We think that is still playing out now at a time when consumers' movement is limited. They don't have all the choice that they should have, and that allows retailers to keep margins high. So that is something that has to be addressed, and we will be doing so.
Well, thanks very much for talking to us. That's James Hodge. He is Chief Economist at the Competition Commission. Incredibly important report this. It's the food price report, and it's found that the forces that were initially behind food price inflation have now subsided, and prices should have stabilized. Consumers, as always, are warned to keep a close eye on the prices at their retailers.